Jesus freak here. Now, behind me you can see 3 stacks of Bibles. Of course, if you're a Ruckmanite, you're going to say there's 1 stack of Bible and 2 stacks of kindling. Now, I divided these Bibles into 3 groupings for a reason. See, all these Bibles, there's 7 of them, you can't see them all. The last one on the bottom is concealed by my body, are NKJVs. All these Bibles, there's 10 of them, are KJVs. And these 6 are a mix. You get a couple NASBs, you get a couple RSVs, you got an NIV 11, and you have a CSB. And I did this to make sort of a point here. We know that most Bibles, most New Testaments at least, because Old Testaments, unless they're translated from the Vulgate, which almost none of them are anymore, or from the Septuagint, which almost none are or ever were, they're going to be primarily translated from the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text has been copied down serif for serif for over 1,000 years. Meaning that outside of something weird like this, well, I should say the New Testament too is almost always going to be translated from Greek. So, you're going to have either translated from the Masoretic, from the majority text in some form, usually the received text, which is a sort of a hybrid but mostly conforms to the majority, or to Nestle and Aland's critical text. And it's a weird one like this, it's going to be something else. Now, these Bibles and these Bibles all contain New Testaments translated from the same Greek text. Maybe not exactly the same. I think they used Stephanus to translate this, and they used Beza to translate this. But the differences between the Vorlage of the 2 texts is going to be minuscule. It's these where you're going to have some significant differences. And even here, the difference between the text used to translate this, and I mean there's various different versions, you're going to find more differences in the earlier modern versions like these than the later ones like these. Might sound ironic, but because we've been finding that the scholarship that was used in the earlier editions of Nestle Aland and in their predecessors, Westcott and Hort, was kind of messed up. But the difference between these and all of these is about 5% in the New Testament. The Old Testament is probably minuscule anyway. Now, there's some obvious howlers in a critical text. For example, I'm going to take this NKJV, and I'm going to read Mark 1:41. Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. And I'm going to lose my stack here. But this is the only translation I know that uses this particular howler, which comes from Codex Bezae. Rather infamous text known for its howlers. It says, Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. And there's a footnote saying, many manuscripts have Jesus was filled with compassion. So they got that reading from one manuscript, and it's one that's known to have problems. What we'd call a howler. It's a mistake so obvious that anyone can catch it. Now, if you ruled out those howlers, I think the number of differences would be far fewer than 5%, maybe 3%. And if you ruled out differences where something was missing in one passage but present in another, you'd probably come down to about 1 or 2. So there's not really that much difference, and it's not something you can really stake your faith on, because it doesn't really matter. The message is preserved, whether the exact words are or not. Now, I'm going to take these critical text-based translations out of the equation. That means I'm just going to reduce this to a question over the KJV and the NKJV. These and these are all based on more or less the same Greek text. At the same time, you have a lot of people out there who will categorize these NKJVs in the same group as those Bibles that I just put away. Some of them will even accuse them of not really being translated from the received text. The fact is, these people have an agenda. A lot of the people, not all of them, because I know Trinitarian pushes this idea that the New King James just isn't good enough. And I know they're not into dual inspirationism. But for the most part, if you're saying that somehow the New Testament of this translation is garbage, and this isn't, there's a good chance you actually believe in dual inspirationism. They went out of their way. They even fought with the publisher. They fought with the publisher to make sure the text space remained based on the Textus Receptus. As a compromise, they put critical text notes in the footnotes. They dealt with most of the objections that KJV people had. It still wasn't good enough because it wasn't the KJV. Because a lot of KJV people believe in dual inspirationism. They're like, who cares about the original Greek or the original Hebrew? Do we have this original Greek or original Hebrew? And they'll be like, some of them will even say, look, I can give you hundreds of spots where the authorized version gives new insight that the original Greek doesn't have. When they start talking like that, you know they believe in dual inspirationism. By the way, I didn't come up with that. Peter Ruckman basically said exactly that. He also said if you find a difference between the original Hebrew and the original Greek and the King James, he always called it the authorized version. Which there's no proof it was ever authorized, because if there were any proof, it was burned up in a fire in 1618. Then you could take your original texts and put them in the circular file. That's the kind of stuff Peter Ruckman would say. See, this can never be good enough for them. As long as it isn't verbatim this. And even some of these aren't good enough for some of them. I can assure you most of the Bibles in this stack, there are actually KJVOs for whom even these are not good enough. Maybe the 2 or 3 on the bottom would be good enough. The rest certainly wouldn't. And if someone wanted to get together and do something like this, translate a new Bible from exactly the same original text that the King James translators used, and say, oh, you had to learn with a lexicon. Lexicon contains the word icon. Therefore, you're a devil worshiper. That's Galen, God, and Ripplinger logic. That's not exaggeration either. She basically pushed that kind of stuff. I mean, look. The only difference between these two Bibles is the translation they use. The only difference between this Bible on one hand and these two Bibles, which are the same text block, even though this is a Holman and this is a Nelson, is a translation. I've got at least one other pair of Bibles where I have both a KJV edition and a New King James edition. In other words, they're exactly the same, except for the translation. And this is closer to this than KJV only people are comfortable with. Because it destroys their assertion that all modern translations are based on the work of Westcott and Hort. And half the time they're bashing Brooke Foss Westcott. They're telling you things about William Wynne Westcott because Gail Ann Ripplinger deliberately conflated the two. She even admitted she did this. Nobody cares. Long as they have some way to bash the modern texts. Now, I don't really use the modern text much. I did a translation of the New Testament myself. It was based on 2 editions of Erasmus and the Clementine Vulgate. The resulting Vorlage is essentially the same as these two, but the mixture of the two text types is a little bit different. And of course, there's a lot in here. This isn't a real 1611. This is a facsimile of an edition from 1833 that was a line-for-line copy of the original, but in Roman type instead of black letter. But I've seen people looking at KJVs with the original notes. And they're shocked to find some of the stuff the original translators put in. Like this. See over here on oh, but only the modern versions translate it that way. Or how about but only modern version have text critical notes. Of course, that's because as to a lot of KJVOs, If it's not like this, it's not a real KJV. Oh, the devil must have made them put them in. Those were in there in 1611. Those were done by the translators. Oh, yeah. Not only did they have trouble with the marginal notes, but they had trouble with the language of the chapter headings, which push a Christian interpretation of the Bible, especially of Isaiah. Because a lot of them seem to take the Schofield notes as theopneustos. And a lot of them believe in dual covenantism too. See, dual covenantism is the idea that Christians can go to heaven through Jesus, and Jews can go to heaven through the Torah. See the problem with that? The problem with that is Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He didn't say I am a way, a truth, and a life. He said I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, he says. An inconvenient verse for people who believe in dual covenantism. But you'll find that's very common in KJV only circles. About the only thing most KJVOs agree on is that they consider the KJV itself. And this isn't always true, but a lot of them do consider the KJV itself to be theopneustos, to be inspired by God. And many of them are so hung up on this being their one doctrinal point that they'll fellowship with outright heretics just because they use the same translation. Have you ever noticed a local church Bible publishers, the church Bible publishers, KJV, says authorized King James on the side? Those exact words. I tell you why that is. They're rippling rights. So they're pushing the idea that the KJV was authorized by God himself. And they don't believe the KJV is a mere version. It is the Bible. So you'll never see version written there. Because it's not a version to them. Some people say, hey, they see that this is the King Jesus version authorized by God. It's not the truth. It just ain't. It's more advantageous in many cases to use it. But I don't think it is inspired above and beyond the originals. Jesus freak out.